Hello everyone, you're watching the channel Stories of Our Life. Friends, make yourselves comfortable. I wish you to truly enjoy listening to this life story.
Ruth and Eleanor were complete opposites. Perhaps that's why they were drawn to each other for many years. The game in the sandbox continued with Eleanor's tantrums when they found out they would be placed in different groups at kindergarten. After some convincing from the kindergarten staff and a few parents, the friends were placed in the same group. There was never a discussion about different schools. And although Eleanor did not have sufficient knowledge and abilities, her sessions with a tutor, her father's connections, and Ruth's assurance to help her friend with studies determined her placement in a grammar school with an emphasis on foreign languages. Eleanor immediately became the soul and activist of the class and soon made a bunch of new friends and acquaintances, while Ruth quietly studied for herself and her friend. But Eleanor deserved credit. Despite her popularity, universal adoration, and love, her friend always came first. If Ruth couldn't attend a party or go on an outing, Eleanor also refused to participate. Taking advantage of their strong friendship, many tried to influence the girls through each other. Through Eleanor, they asked Ruth for help with studies, and through Ruth, they sought invitations to exclusive friends-only parties. "We can move mountains together," Eleanor laughed, hugging her friend. Of course, Eleanor was the first to start dating boys. And it was not surprising. She had a bright appearance, a cheerful character, and her fashionably trendy clothes attracted the opposite sex like a magnet. The young men were ecstatic when the girl agreed to go to the movies, a cafe, or simply dance at a school event. They didn't mind interacting with Ruth either, they just wanted to be closer to the object of their adoration. And only Eleanor saw the true beauty of her friend, which was no less than her own. "Ruth. Come on, let's do your hair, makeup, and dress you up nicely," she persuaded her friend. "I swear, you'll outshine everyone. And even you?" Ruth smiled softly. "Well, probably not me." Eleanor laughed. "But I assure you, you'll be just as stunning." "Thank you, Eleanor, but I'm happy with myself just the way I am," the girl said to her friend. Eleanor laughed cheerfully and waved her hand. These conversations always ended the same way, but she never lost hope that her best friend would someday exchange her plain dress for something more feminine and revealing. Let her luxurious long hair down and accentuate her huge green eyes and sensual lips with makeup. After finishing school, Ruth easily got into university. As for Eleanor, despite all her efforts and her friends' help, she failed the entrance exams. But she didn't despair. She knew her father wouldn't let them be separated from her beloved friend, who restrained her impulses towards a carefree life. And that's what happened. Her parents enrolled her in a paid program at the university. In university, Eleanor immediately became the life of any group and a desired guest at any party. Ruth, on the other hand, became increasingly immersed in her studies, distancing herself from the typical student life. Now, Eleanor would invite her to parties only because she felt obliged to, knowing that her friend wouldn't go anyway. However, at Ruth's request, Eleanor would occasionally decline any event and spend time alone with her, going to the movies or a cafe. Ruth was grateful to Eleanor for this and tried not to take advantage of their friendship. She understood that her friend was completely different from her. But sometimes Ruth would venture out to loud parties, giving in to her friends' requests. She even bought suitable outfits for such occasions with Eleanor's help. To her surprise, young men would notice her, but after a short conversation, Ruth would get bored and become indifferent towards them, which, of course, pushed the guys away. She couldn't understand how someone could only be interested in clubs, cars, and money in life. Just before her birthday, Eleanor fell in love once again. "You can't even imagine how amazing he is," she exclaimed, rolling her eyes while telling her friend. "He's handsome, athletic, smart, caring, gentle, and has a great sense of humor." "Caring? That's something new." Ruth smiled, listening to her friend's enthusiastic outburst. "Usually, you stick to good-looking, athletic, and occasionally funny men. He's just wow." Eleanor continued with a sigh, covering her eyes. "And he's fantastic in bed." "Oh. Spare me the details. Ruth covered her friend's mouth with her hand. You just don't understand. Eleanor passionately insisted, removing her hand and widening her eyes. With a man like him, you don't even realize how you end up in bed. Eleanor, I really hope that someday I'll experience the same sensations as you. But for now, let's skip the details. Oh, you prude. Eleanor smiled and hugged her best friend tightly. I'll introduce you to him at my birthday party. Maybe you'll change your opinion about men. But I warn you, Larry is mine. I have no intention of claiming your treasure. Ruth laughed. Ruth, meet my Larry. Eleanor grabbed Ruth's hand from the threshold and pulled her along to make the introduction. Ruth, feeling slightly embarrassed in the presence of guests, half of whom she didn't even know, followed her friend. Nice to meet you, my name is Larry, the young man softly smiled at Ruth, his gaze spreading warmth and causing a slight weakness in her body. She wanted to stand there and gaze at him forever. At that moment, someone bumped into her, snapping Ruth back to reality. I'm Ruth, she murmured, extending her hand, but immediately regretting it. A literal electric shock ran through her as their hands touched. Eleanor has told me so much about you, I couldn't wait to meet you. He looked at the hand he was holding with such tenderness that Ruth understood she should leave this party right now. The intensity of that gaze directed at her friend became unbearably painful. All right, you've exchanged pleasantries, let's go. Eleanor grabbed Ruth's other hand and led them towards a large table in the center of the room, filled with various drinks and snacks. A birthday party can't go on without the birthday girl. Their approach was met with loud enthusiastic cheers. Hands reached out from all sides to hug, kiss, clink glasses, and simply touch Eleanor. She enjoyed being the center of attention, and she didn't hide it. Care for a drink, a voice whispered by Ruth's ear, a voice she would recognize among thousands. Trying to appear nonchalant, Ruth took the offered glass and quickly drank it, feeling a burning sensation in her throat. What is this? She exclaimed. Champagne, Larry replied, puzzled, taking the glass from her hand, sniffing it, and then swishing the remaining drops on his tongue. Ruth's cheeks flushed and her head spun from his movements. Strange, it's just regular champagne, the surprised young man said, oblivious to her state. Larry. What have you done? You gave Ruth alcohol? Eleanor rushed over to them, having freed herself from the well-wishers. It's just champagne, the guy stared at his girlfriend questioningly. I told you Ruth never drank anything stronger than orange juice. Eleanor frowned, though it was clear she was putting on a show. Oh, I'm so sorry, I completely forgot about that. Larry looked guiltily at Ruth. Are you okay? I think so, Ruth stammered, feeling confused. Quick, have something to eat. Eleanor commanded, handing her a canopy. Larry, she turned to the young man, who still had a guilty expression on his face. Quickly get her some juice, or better yet, water. Larry headed towards the table. Well, as soon as you arrived, I immediately lost sight of you. Eleanor anxiously looked at her friend. It's all right, Eleanor, really, Ruth tried to reassure her. I just had a little drink. It will pass soon. Here you go. Larry, who approached them, handed Ruth a glass of water and a plate of sandwiches. Thank you. Ruth made sure her hand didn't accidentally touch his. Common friends ran up to them and pulled them towards the dance floor. I'd rather sit for a while, Ruth asked Eleanor. All right, Eleanor agreed. Just let me know if anything happens. Your friend is so strange. What do you mean? Eleanor squinted her eyes, slowing down their already slow dance. She's like she's from another world, or century. She's so unconventional and very beautiful. I would say ethereal, Larry looked tenderly at Eleanor. I'll agree with the unconventional part. But as for being from another world or century, Ruth is a very intelligent and pragmatic girl. It's just that no one has bothered to get to know her better yet. Although, maybe it's for the best. She'll wait for her one and only. There are all sorts of fools around here who aren't interested in anything except easy gain. I'm not talking about you, Larry. You're different. Well, thank you, the young man kissed Eleanor gently. She nestled against him. He truly was different. Larry was the first man to captivate her with his gallantry, care, tenderness, and responsibility. With him, she felt like she was behind a stone wall. From the champagne, loud music, and the strong impact of meeting Larry, or more likely, because of the latter, Ruth developed a headache. She spent most of the evening sitting in a chair by the wall, occasionally checked on by Eleanor and Larry, who brought her water. The festivities were in full swing when Ruth realized she couldn't stay there any longer. She found her friend and informed her of her intention to leave. "Are you okay?" Eleanor asked, concerned. "Everything's fine. I just have a headache." Ruth tried to make her smile genuine. "You know how I feel about parties. I'll go home, take a pill, and go to bed. Thank you for a wonderful evening." Eleanor and Larry accompanied her to the taxi. "Please call me when you arrive," Eleanor requested. "I'll worry." "Okay, I will." Ruth kissed her friend on the cheek and extended her hand to Larry. "Nice to meet you." Likewise, Larry's smile made Ruth's head spin and her legs tremble again. At home, she took a pill, called Eleanor to let her know that everything was all right, changed clothes, took a shower, and got into bed. It was time to reflect on and evaluate everything that had happened to her today. But as soon as she thought of Larry, her pragmatic thinking switched off, and she burst into tears, burying her face in the pillow. Larry was not a student at the university where the two friends studied. He was a graduate of a technical university and already employed at one of the city's companies. A promising engineer highly regarded by the management, he was an enviable bachelor among his peers. However, at one of the parties, when Eleanor appeared, Larry almost instantly fell in love with her. The lively, sociable beauty immediately drew the attention of all the men at the party. Paying no attention to her companion whom she came with, she flirted with everyone, eliciting admiration from men and hatred from women gathered at the party. Larry observed her from a distance, realizing that he had no chance against the crowd of her numerous admirers. To his surprise, Eleanor approached him. "Can I catch my breath with a man who's the only one not undressing me with his eyes?" she asked so casually, without a hint of coquetry, that Larry immediately wanted to do exactly what she had just said. They spent the rest of the party chatting away. Eleanor skillfully rebuffed other men trying to get her attention. Her companion, who accompanied her to the party, stood nearby, drinking glass after glass, glaring at Larry. "It seems like your guy doesn't like that you've forgotten about him," Larry nodded towards the admirer. "Oh," Eleanor waved her hand as if shooing away a fly. "I met him recently at the movies. I thought he was a decent young man, but he immediately started making suggestive remarks. I made it clear that I have no intention of dating a boring guy, and he invited me to this party." When Larry and Eleanor were about to leave, the boring guy tried to rectify the situation and assert his rights over Eleanor, but she wrinkled her nose in disgust and advised him to smarten up. Then, while the admirer was digesting what he had heard, she grabbed Larry's hand and dragged him away from the party. The immediate ignition of passion led them to end up in bed together, literally on their second date. This further fueled Larry's interest, and he forgot about everything else except this girl. She was beautiful, enchanting, and unpredictable. He eagerly looked forward to their meetings, and with each encounter, he realized more and more that he had found the one with whom he wanted to spend the rest of his life. Getting to know her best friend, Ruth, further convinced Larry of his choice. They were too different, as if from different universes, eras, and backgrounds. However, Eleanor loved her friend, and it was evident to the naked eye. She cherished and cared for her. She listened to her opinions and was always ready to give up everything for Ruth. She even canceled dates with Larry for her. Larry didn't mind. Ruth evoked mixed feelings of admiration, interest, and tenderness in him. She was like a child. He gladly came to her aid when male involvement was needed, carrying heavy bags, helping her choose a new gadget, rejecting persistent suitors. Although Ruth didn't face the same problem as Eleanor when it came to admirers, because there were hardly any suitors to begin with. Quiet and modest, Ruth gave the impression of being an easy target. Lazy male students, thinking that a couple of compliments would lead to her finishing university for them, were drawn to her. Ruth paid no attention to them. The most persistent suitors had already dealt with Eleanor or Larry. Sometimes Eleanor insisted on Ruth's behalf. Ruth. You'll soon turn into a blue stocking. Let Larry introduce you to a decent guy to add some variety to your life. Let's go somewhere. Relax, have fun. But Ruth consistently declined. Eleanor was puzzled. What was wrong with her? Had she gone mad with her studies? You're about to get your diploma, Larry smiled. And she has to write 2 of them. What are you implying? Eleanor playfully scolded him. Well, you haven't even started. Yeah, that's true, the girl admitted. Term papers, essays, diplomas, and all that jazz, it's not my forte. Okay. We'll leave Ruth alone. Do you hear that, Ruth? But only until you defend your diploma. After that, you won't get away from me. Ruth smiled and nodded in agreement. During the exams and diploma defense period, Larry hardly saw Eleanor. Under the guidance of her best friend, the girl finally took her studies seriously. He missed her so much that when it became unbearable, he would call and ask for a meeting. Eleanor agreed, and he would rush to her house just to hold her in his arms and kiss her, even if only for a brief moment. The girl was also happy to see him. Her eyes gazed at him so eagerly that he wanted to shout, "Forget about your studies. I can provide for you for the rest of your life. You won't have to work." But he understood that Eleanor would never agree to that. Despite her carefree and cheerful nature, she didn't want to be dependent on anyone. Larry had no choice but to wait. And finally, the long-awaited day arrived. Today, the girls had their diploma defense, followed by a small celebration. Since morning, Larry couldn't sit still, pacing back and forth in his apartment. He didn't plan to stay at the party for long. He had other plans for the evening and night. 2 hours before the scheduled time, he rushed out of the house and headed to the nearest jewelry store. The decision was made. He would ask Eleanor to marry him. Ruth had almost come to terms with the fact that the man who had touched her heart was dating her friend. She was happy at the thought that he was with someone who was dear to her, and she could occasionally see him and hope, even just a little, that one day he would tire of her best friend and, being in love with her, would seek support from Ruth. On that day, the day of the diploma defense, she asked Eleanor for the first time to help her choose an outfit. Surprised and inspired, her friend rushed to assist, forgetting about herself. After trying on a bunch of dresses, Eleanor handed Ruth one of her own dresses, saying, "This is the most modest of my festive dresses, but I'm sure it's perfect for you." The dress was truly magnificent, accentuating Ruth's figure and complementing her eyes. The shiny open-toed shoes drew attention to her infinitely long legs. Eleanor insisted that Ruth leave her hair down in loose curls, held back by an elegant hairpin with emerald stones. "You look like a nymph. You're like a queen," Eleanor exclaimed, filled with admiration for her friend. To her surprise, Ruth realized that she herself was also attracting attention, not just her friend. Young men genuinely courted her and saw her as a person, not just an object that could be useful to them. Occasionally, she caught Larry's slightly surprised and smiling gaze, and that was enough to make her happy. Embracing her newfound confidence, she accepted compliments from young men, flirted with them, and even agreed to dance with them a few times. However, she firmly rejected any persistent offers to accompany her home. "Excuse me, may I have your attention, please?" Larry's voice echoed from the stage. "I apologize for interrupting your celebration, but I kindly ask for your understanding. I'm extremely nervous right now because for the first time in my life, I want to do this, and I request your support." The murmurs died down, and an intrigued silence fell over the room. "Eleanor," Larry continued, "please come to me." Surprised, Eleanor rose and walked onto the mini stage of the restaurant. Sensing that Larry's words wouldn't please her, Ruth sat down on the nearest chair and took a glass of champagne in her hand. Meanwhile, Larry pulled out a small box from his pocket and knelt before Eleanor. Eleanor, you're the most beautiful girl in my life. When I met you, I realized that you were the one I had been waiting for all my life. I've waited, and now I want you to be with me always. Will you marry me? Someone in the room gasped in excitement, while others laughed. Ruth quickly downed her glass and reached for a second one. Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes. It was evident that she couldn't speak due to the overwhelming emotions. Desperate to say something, she nodded quickly and extended her hand with an extended finger. Amid enthusiastic cheers and thunderous applause, Larry put the ring on her finger, jumped up, and embraced her, followed by a kiss. Ruth downed another glass and reached for a third one. How romantic, she exclaimed, unaware that two of her classmates had approached her table. Ruth, are you happy for your friend? Of course. Ruth attempted to display an enthusiastic smile on her face. Let's toast to the future newlyweds, one of the girls shouted in the room and raised her glass. The others joined in with cheers and clinking glasses. Ruth also joined the collective cheers before emptying her glass in one gulp. The music started again, and everyone began to dance. Ruth was pulled into the collective circle, where she, someone who had never danced in her life, danced just as well as the others. She didn't notice how much time had passed when Eleanor and Larry approached her. Oh. Hey, guys. Ruth smiled widely. Congratulations. I'm so happy for you. Ruth, are you drunk? Eleanor grabbed her friend's shoulder and looked at her with concern in her eyes. I think so, Ruth didn't deny it. Have you lost your mind? Have you forgotten how bad you felt last time? No, but Eleanor, everyone is having fun, celebrating, drinking champagne. But not in such quantities. Eleanor said firmly. Eleanor, you're not my mother. Agreed. I'm your friend, and I don't want you to do anything foolish and suffer. But since you perceive my concern in that way, then, by all means, continue in the same spirit. I won't say another word. Larry, let's go. The girl has grown up, and she no longer needs our protection. An angry Eleanor turned on her heels and walked away from Ruth. Larry cast a concerned look at Ruth and hurried after his bride-to-be. What am I doing? Rang in the girl's head. What am I trying to prove? Is Eleanor, my best friend whom I've known since childhood, to blame that her boyfriend, her future husband, fell in love with her and not with me? Is Larry to blame that I fell in love with him at first sight? They have always treated me so well, cared for me, shielded me from any troubles, wishing me well. And me? I behaved like a pig. And I got drunk on top of it. Eleanor, wait. Ruth shouted and ran after her friend. Eleanor heard her cry, stopped, and turned around. Eleanor, forgive me. I don't know what I'm saying. You're right. And I'm an ungrateful pig. Why are you saying that, Ruth? Eleanor approached her friend and hugged her. You're wonderful. You just had a bit too much alcohol. You've been living under tension all year because of these final exams and diplomas. It's no wonder that your nerves gave in. I was having fun while you were studying for both of us. And it's my fault that I left you today, preoccupied with my own personal life, and you ended up relaxing like this. Forgive me. Oh, Eleanor. Ruth was on the verge of tears. Eleanor's eyes also glistened with tears. Well, girls. I think it's better for us to leave here and sit in a quieter place where we can talk, have a drink, and teach Ruth the proper way to celebrate events. What do you think? Let's go, the friends nodded happily. Reluctantly, Ruth put on her coat, picked up her bag and the gift box, and left the house. She had stopped enjoying this holiday 3 years ago. The memories of it made her want to lock herself away, crawl under the covers, and not appear anywhere. But she had to buy gifts, pick out an outfit, and go to celebrate the new year at her best friend's and her husband's place. At first, Ruth tried to decline, citing that the New Year was a family holiday and she didn't want to interfere with her friend's quiet family happiness, but Eleanor was adamant. "And who are you? Aren't you family? We've been together since we were babies. We're closer than blood sisters. Our parents have their own circles and interests, you'll be bored with them. So don't say you're intruding. You're a member of our family and obligated to celebrate the New Year with us." "Indeed, Ruth," Larry supported his wife, "you shouldn't celebrate the holiday with colleagues. What if you get bored of them or they become too pushy, or you get tired? You have us. And at any moment, you can retreat to the room we set up for you." "What about colleagues? They booked a beautiful restaurant with a festive program. And if I get bored, I can easily call a taxi and go home." "Taxi? On New Year's Eve?" Eleanor laughed. "I assure you, it'll be impossible. In any case, you're celebrating the holiday with us, end of discussion." And so, for the third consecutive year, Ruth endured the agony of attending the New Year celebration in the company of her best friend and the man she secretly loved but, unfortunately, couldn't shake off her feelings for. Immediately after college, Ruth joined an international travel agency, where she became the department head within a year. It was not surprising at all. Her red diploma was backed by excellent knowledge of languages and cultures of different countries. Initially skeptical of her educational documents, her colleagues gradually started to respect her, and the management appreciated her. Eleanor, on the other hand, got a job in the same company where Larry worked. She worked as a translator. However, judging by her stories, she didn't do much translation work. Mostly, she flirted with male colleagues and seduced her husband. Larry agreed with his wife in everything and loved her immensely. Citing her busy schedule, Ruth tried to see her friends as infrequently as possible. It was too painful for her to witness the man she loved experiencing the same thing she did, but towards another woman. But what hurt even more was that Larry sincerely considered her a friend. Just a friend and a genderless being. But no matter how hard Ruth tried to avoid meeting her friends, 3 times a year she still had to be in their company. On New Year's Eve and on the spouses' birthdays. "Hey! Happy New Year!" Eleanor said, taking the gift box from Ruth's hands. At the same time, Larry helped the girl take off her coat. "Come in. You look great." "Thank you. You look amazing too." "All right," we exchanged compliments, "and now let's go. I'll introduce you to the guests." Eleanor dragged her friend into the large living room, where a few people were already present. "You didn't tell me that you would have guests," Ruth whispered anxiously to her friend. "We decided that we've spent enough time alone, and to avoid getting bored with each other, we decided to diversify our company with other people. And you're probably tired of celebrating only with me and Larry," Eleanor whispered in response and smiled broadly at 2 men they approached at that moment. "Ruth, allow me to introduce you to my colleagues, Aaron and Henry. Gentlemen, please meet my best friend, Ruth." "Very nice to meet you," each of the men gallantly kissed Ruth's hand. Then Eleanor introduced her friend to the married couple, Andrew and Ariana. It turned out that they had vacationed together in Italy. Ruth was also introduced to Diana, the spouse's colleague. After the greetings, Eleanor looked at Larry. He understood her gaze and spoke loudly, "Well, now that everyone is here, shall we sit down at the table?" Aaron turned out to be an engaging conversationalist and an attentive companion. He made an effort to give attention to both Ruth and Diana. Meanwhile, Larry was engrossed in a discussion with the married couple, and Eleanor was engaged with Henry. Ruth didn't notice it immediately, but she suddenly felt that her friend was leaning too close to her conversation partner. Henry's gaze didn't match that of a friend and colleague. It caressed and undressed Eleanor with his eyes, and she responded promisingly. Ruth shook her head, it couldn't be true. Her friend wasn't like that. Yes, she was a flirt, but she loved her husband and was loyal to him. Convinced that it was her imagination, Ruth joined the conversation between Diana and Aaron. After a moment, it seemed to her that Diana was casting strange glances at Henry and Eleanor. Anger and despair were evident in her eyes. "What's wrong with you today?" Ruth scolded herself. "You're imagining nonsense the whole evening." She looked at her glass. No, it wasn't empty. She had barely taken a few sips throughout the time at the table. Her musings were interrupted by Larry's loud voice. "So, ladies and gentlemen. In a couple of minutes, the clock will strike, and I ask all the men present here to fill the glasses of our ladies." Ruth saw Larry and Eleanor start kissing. The spouses, Andrew and Ariana, also embraced. Diana received a round of cheek kisses from all the men present, and then it was Ruth's turn. "Happy New Year," they each hugged her in turn. "Happy New Year." Larry lightly touched her lips with his, then recoiled, shocked by what he had done. Ruth smiled, as if she saw nothing wrong with it, and just as quickly kissed him on the lips, then turned to congratulate Diana. Her cheeks were burning. But only she and Larry knew why. After exchanging greetings and spending some more time enjoying the snacks, the guests gradually began to leave the table. Larry went to turn on the music, and Diana suggested that Ruth step away from the group. They went to the balcony. Opening the window, Diana pulled out a pack of cigarettes and offered one to Ruth, who shook her head in refusal. Shrugging, Diana lit her own cigarette. "How do you like the celebration?" "Unusual," Ruth honestly replied. "Why?" "Usually, the three of us celebrate the new year together. And in general, I'm not a fan of crowds, and here." Ruth looked at her conversationalist, who was examining her with interest. "No, don't get me wrong. It's just that Eleanor and I, despite being very different, have been friends since early childhood. We're practically inseparable, like twins." "Noted," Diana nodded. "Yes. But now I'm engrossed in work, Eleanor is married, and we rarely see each other. Only on occasions like this." Diana wanted to say something else, but at that moment, Aaron entered the balcony. "Can I join you, ladies?" "Yes, of course," Ruth replied on behalf of both, "especially since I'm already freezing, but I didn't want to leave Diana alone." "You came just in time." Ruth left the balcony and returned to the living room. Larry was engaged in an enthusiastic discussion with the married couple. Eleanor and Henry were nowhere to be seen. Assuming that her friend had gone to her bedroom for something, Ruth headed there. In the semi-darkness of the room, she could hear heavy breathing and the sounds of kisses. Among the embracing lovers, Ruth recognized her friend Eleanor and Henry. "Eleanor? Are you out of your mind?" Ruth sat in a cafe across from her friend and even forgot about the melting ice cream as conflicting emotions consumed her. "I saw everything." "What did you see?" Eleanor calmly asked. "You and Henry. How could you?" 2 months had already passed since that fateful day when Ruth noticed her friend's infidelity. "Ruth, understand me correctly. Larry is a wonderful man. A great husband. I truly love him and want to be with him, but in the past year, he has become so dull. If before, we used to go everywhere, have fun, now he insists on a normal family life. He wants me to have his child, to behave like a typical wife, cooking, creating a cozy home, giving birth to children. What happened to him? I don't understand. I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready for children now. I will definitely have a couple of beautiful little ones someday, but not now. And he wants it right now. But isn't that why you created a family? I married him to be with him. To make him mine. And so that we would always be together. Do you love him? Of course. It's not the right time for such seriousness, Eleanor pleaded with her friend. Do you judge me? I think you just need to talk to Larry about this, rather than betraying him. Do you think I haven't talked to him? He thinks differently. He said that it's time to stop living just for ourselves and start thinking about the future. And I don't want to. I'll be bored with that kind of life. But betrayal. You just don't understand how obsessed Larry has become with this idea of a normal family life. He constantly talks about it, gives me women's magazines with smiling housewives surrounded by children. And Henry. Eleanor dreamily smiled, he makes my life exciting. Eleanor, I still don't understand. Well, that's who I am. Eleanor shook her head and pleadingly looked at her friend. You know that I can't sit still. I need excitement, movement, lively company, and thrilling experiences. For the first time in her life, Ruth felt disgusted. If before she understood her friend and even envied her carefree attitude, now she no longer understood her. She suddenly realized with horror how different they were at their core, with different priorities and views on life. She also felt deeply hurt for Larry. According to Eleanor's words, he was any girl's dream, but she herself didn't appreciate him. Ruth bid farewell to her friend, who couldn't understand why her mood had suddenly soured. Shrugging her shoulders, she looked around the cafe. At the bar counter sat a respectable man, observing her with interest. Eleanor gave him an easy smile and immediately received a raised glass in response. A romance was brewing. Ruth, hi. This is Larry. Recognize him? Of course, she recognized him. She could recognize his voice out of a million. Gathering her strength, Ruth tried to speak casually. Hi, Larry. Of course, I recognize you. Moreover, I have your number saved in my phone. Can we meet and talk? The girl became anxious. What does he want to talk to her about? Has he found out about Eleanor's infidelity? And if he has, then he must think that she, Ruth, is aware of it too. He will forgive Eleanor, he loves her. But with Ruth, he might end their relationship altogether, he won't tolerate betrayal. Although, what could she have done? Drag her friend away from yet another suitor? And what if he's decided that they're flirting together? Sorry, Larry, I have a lot of work to do, Ruth said. Well, Ruth, please. It's really important to me. I'm willing to meet you at any convenient time and place. Larry pleaded. It didn't seem like Larry wanted to argue with her. She needed to take the risk and find out what had happened to him that he specifically needed her help. All right. Come to my office. There's a nice cafe nearby. Wait for me there, I'll come, she said. Thank you, Ruth. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. I'm here. It meant he was somewhere close. Ruth became nervous again. But there was nothing else to do. Putting on her jacket, she left the office. I ordered coffee for you. If you want anything else, just let me know. Larry looked disheveled. No, thank you. What happened? Ruth, I don't know how to say this. But. Eleanor? Larry took Ruth's hands in his, causing her head to spin, and she struggled to understand everything he was telling her. But she didn't have the strength to remove her hands. You know, when I met her, she was so bright, cheerful, enchanting. She attracted me like a magnet with her boundless energy. I fell in love with her. But now, I thought she would outgrow all of this, and we would live a quiet family life, have children. But she. You see, Ruth, Eleanor doesn't change, she still craves those all-night parties, lively and noisy gatherings. And I've grown out of all that. And I don't know how to convince her that it's time to stop. After all, we're not getting any younger. Larry, I think it's too early to talk about old age, Ruth said gently. Eleanor has always been like this. And it's unlikely she'll change anytime soon. That's why I wanted to meet with you. You two are close friends. She should listen to you. Larry insisted. Larry, you're mistaken. We may be close friends, but we've always respected each other's personal lives and never interfered in each other's affairs. I'm not asking you to change her mind. Just talk to her. Find out about her future plans. Maybe you can still influence her opinion about married life, even just a little. All right, Larry. I'll try to talk to her and help your marriage. But I can't promise any results. Thank you, Ruth. Goodbye, Larry. After the meeting with Larry, Ruth wasn't herself. Work wasn't going well, and conflicting thoughts kept swirling in her head. How could she convince Eleanor that her infidelity could significantly ruin her life? But maybe she shouldn't do anything? Eleanor couldn't be changed, and for Ruth, it was a chance to get closer to Larry. When he learns about his wife's infidelity, she'll be there by his side, Ruth. And perhaps her support will make him see her differently, not just as a friend but as a calm, loving, and domestic woman ready for married life. What are you thinking? Ruth scolded herself. You're condemning Eleanor, but you're ready to take her husband away. Well, maybe not take him away, but take advantage of the situation. What kind of friend are you after that? Deciding to meet with Eleanor today, Ruth was about to call her, but the ringing of the landline interrupted her. Ruth, come in. Her boss was as brief and somewhat gruff, as always. No wonder. Before starting his own travel agency, Mr. Albert had experienced all the hardships of military service, been to several hotspots, and retired as a lieutenant colonel. After that, he decided to open his own travel agency, which, thanks to his commanding leadership and connections, quickly grew and became one of the most sought after in the country. I'm listening. All the employees of the travel agency tried to be punctual and concise, following their leader's example. Here's the thing, Ruth. I think you're aware that our business in Indonesia isn't going as well as we would like. Ruth nodded quickly. It seems like a popular destination, and we've been sending tourists there for a long time, but there are always some problems. I think it's because of remote control, Mr. Albert, Ruth suggested. Yes, you're absolutely right. The boss raised his index finger. That's why I've decided that we should open our own office there. It will be a branch of our company. Well, it's a good idea. Are you assigning this task to me? Ruth asked. Yes, her boss replied. All right. I'll send a team of our specialists there. Let them recruit staff, find an office space, and set up communications. No. I'm afraid nothing will change with local staff. We need a manager from our side. Moreover, they should be there on a permanent basis, not temporarily. Well, I think someone from our team would be willing to move and live in Bali, for example. Ruth, I meant you, the boss said affectionately, looking at the girl. Me? But why? Ruth exclaimed. You're a very capable specialist, you have excellent language skills, and as a leader, you've proven yourself. And besides, you don't have a family. It's quite problematic to relocate an entire family to another country. But you, on the other hand, are a perfect fit. Ruth was displeased that everything had been decided for her. So what if she wasn't married? She had parents after all. Friends, acquaintances. Why should she give up everything for work? Ruth, wait, don't jump to conclusions. Mr. Albert raised his hand reassuringly. I'll give you a month to think it over. Consider everything carefully and agree. In return, I promise a significant salary increase, a small apartment on the oceanfront at the company's expense, and a personal car. The management of the branch will be entirely up to you. The only thing I'll expect from you is to solve problems and increase profits. The boss smiled. I need to think about it and consult with my family. After all, I'm not completely alone. Ruth replied. Of course, Ruth. You have a whole month to consider. And I make no promises. And, in fact, I'm not sure if I'll agree. You have a month to think it over, Ruth. Well, what a day. Ruth sat in her office, staring blankly out the window. First, Larry with his ambiguous request. Then this conversation with the boss. And what if I just leave everything and escape to Indonesia? Let them figure it out here without me. And I'll bury myself in work to avoid thinking. They say a change of scenery helps. But at the thought of possibly never seeing Larry again, her heart shattered into countless pieces, and she felt like howling. So? I need to set aside the issue of Indonesia for a couple of days and focus on current problems. Ruth decided. I have to talk to Eleanor, at least to convince myself that I can't help Larry in any way. And we can also discuss my possible departure. Reaching this conclusion, Ruth picked up the phone and dialed her parents' number. She needed to calm down and hear an independent and reasonable opinion. Her parents wouldn't give bad advice. Ruth left work early. It seemed like the director was ready to accommodate any whims in anticipation of her agreement to move to Bali. A couple of hours later, Ruth was at her parents' house. Well, what's the matter, daughter? Her father sipped his after-dinner drink and looked kindly at her. I think it's a great leap in your career. And it's not just about material benefits. They're giving you complete freedom of action, and that means a lot. You'll be your own boss, answerable only directly to the management, and even then, only if you worsen the performance indicators. And I'm sure you'll only improve them. Dad. But it's so far away. And for so long. We won't see each other at all. We don't see each other often anyway. And now we can come to visit you on vacation. Besides, video calls haven't been cancelled. I assure you, we'll see each other much more frequently than if we were living in the same city. Ruth sighed. Maybe her father was right. But what about Eleanor and Larry? She stayed overnight at her parents' place. Before going to bed, Ruth's mother entered her room. Ruth, I know something is bothering you, she gently stroked her daughter's head. Maybe you can share your thoughts with me? I'm sure it's one of the obstacles to your departure. Perhaps I can help dispel your doubts. Ruth looked at her mother and, taking a deep breath, began her story. When Ruth entered the cafe, Eleanor was already there. A man rose from the table where her friend was sitting and quickly moved to the bar counter. Flirting with you again? Ruth asked, winking. Yeah, Eleanor waved her hand. He's my new acquaintance. Ruth felt uneasy. You mean, a new lover? What about Henry? And Larry? Ruth. Get yourself a man already and stop fainting over my suitors. I'm not fainting. Moreover, I'm not surprised that you have several lovers. But don't you think it's unfair to Larry? How do you get into bed with him after them? Ruth. The less he knows, the better he sleeps. Or. What are you trying to say? Eleanor narrowed her perfectly made-up eyes. Do you want to tell everything to Larry? Well, go ahead. Do you think he'll believe you? Even if he does, he'll still forgive me. He loves me. I didn't intend to tell your husband anything. It just so happened that he became my friend, and I'm ashamed to look him in the eye, Ruth replied. What do you have to be ashamed of? You're not his wife, after all, Eleanor retorted. It's the fact that I'm hiding this information, thereby betraying him. Oh, such tenderness. Ruth, forget it. Those are only my problems. Let's change the subject. What did you want to talk to me about? Ruth remained silent, realizing that discussing family matters with Eleanor would be futile. So, that's what you wanted to talk about, Eleanor guessed. No. But what I wanted to say is no longer relevant, Ruth replied. Great. Let me introduce you to my boyfriend then. Without waiting for her friend's response, Eleanor waved her hands, beckoning the man at the counter to join their table. Meet my best friend, Ruth, Eleanor said. Pleasure to meet you, the young man gallantly leaned forward to shake Ruth's hand. Likewise, the girl muttered and quickly withdrew her hand. Ignoring her friend's behavior, Eleanor continued talking. Darling, don't you have a friend who's similar to you? My friend has been stuck at work, never goes out, and has become damn boring. We'll find one, the man replied, openly assessing Ruth with his eyes. Great. Then why don't we stop wasting time and invite you and your friend somewhere tonight? Eleanor asked, smiling enchantingly. Sounds like a fantastic idea. Ruth, I have a request for you. Tell Larry that we've decided to have a girls' night out and went to the movies. I'm sorry, Eleanor, but I have other plans for tonight, Ruth said, annoyed. Her friend assumed she could make decisions for her, decide who she should go out with and where. And now she was forcing her to lie and defend her. No way. Hey, what's the matter with you? Eleanor looked at her friend in surprise. Then she stood up from her chair and nodded her head towards a corner. Come on, let's go and talk privately. Ruth followed her inside. What's going on, friend? Are you trying to interfere in my personal life again? Eleanor's voice carried a threat. Seems to me like it's you who's trying to meddle in my personal life. Ruth yelled. I didn't ask you to introduce me to old womanizers and decide where I should go in the evening. You won't be needed soon anyway, Eleanor retorted. Suddenly, Ruth became completely indifferent. She realized that she and Eleanor had long become different people, and it was detrimental for them to be together. I need to go, Ruth said wearily and headed towards the exit. Well, then get lost. Stop pretending to be an innocent little lamb. I'll manage without you somehow. Eleanor spat. Hello? After such a nasty argument with Eleanor, Ruth wasn't surprised by anything anymore, but Larry's appearance near her apartment was a surprise. Hello? Come in. Ruth led him into the hallway. What's happened? Oh, a lot of things. Larry took off his shoes and jacket and walked into the kitchen. Ruth put the kettle on and looked at him questioningly. I only found out today that you and Eleanor had a fight. Is it because of my request? No, Ruth had resigned herself to the fact that she no longer had friends over the past 2 weeks. You know, she quit her job, saying she was bored sitting in an office. She got a job as an administrator at a nightclub. Now she disappears there every night. I'm glad she found a job that suits her, Ruth calmly replied. Why did Larry come, though? She didn't understand. We hardly see each other anymore. She invited me, but lately, I've grown tired of all these noisy parties. But I can't stand being alone at home. So, I decided to come over to you. If it's not okay, I'll leave. No, you're not bothering me, Ruth whispered quietly. They were strolling through the park. Ruth couldn't bring herself to tell Larry about the job offer. She was afraid of his reaction and wanted to hear his opinion. Today, the director reminded her that she had a week to decide. Exactly a week had passed since the evening when Larry showed up at her doorstep. That evening, they talked a lot, and the man didn't leave until well past midnight. She never mustered the courage to tell him why she had fought with Eleanor, despite Larry's insistence. She also didn't mention her intention to move to Indonesia. The next day, Larry called her and suggested having dinner together. Well, I'm not much of a company and entertainment enthusiast anymore, he chuckled sadly over the phone, but I don't want to spend the evening alone either. Ruth agreed. They had a wonderful time, dining in a quiet, cozy restaurant, and then taking a walk in the park. Larry talked about his work and funny incidents that happened to him and his colleagues. Ruth listened and smiled. She was only happy to be by his side, to hear his voice, and occasionally touch his hand. They started seeing each other every day. They went to the movies together, visited cafes, strolled through the park, and even went to the theater once. Occasionally, Larry would hold her hand, and those were the happiest moments. Ruth knew she was doing something wrong. After all, Larry was a married man, albeit to her former friend. But she couldn't help herself. She couldn't give up these meetings. Yesterday, he walked her to her apartment and took her hands in his. They stood there silently for a few seconds, looking into each other's eyes. Then, Larry suddenly hugged her tightly and passionately kissed her. Caught off guard, Ruth responded to his kiss at first, but then she pushed him away and rushed into her apartment, locking the door behind her, leaning weakly against it. She felt that he hadn't left and was still standing outside the door. Ruth tried not to even breathe. It seemed like an eternity before the footsteps receded. Today, Larry called her as if nothing had happened and suggested meeting up. At first, she wanted to refuse, but then changed her mind. What would it change? The doubts and the unsaid? No, better to clarify everything. They walked in silence along the pathway. Each of them was contemplating how to start the conversation. They started together. Ruth didn't have a chance to say. I know she's cheating on me. His words hit her like a thunderbolt out of the blue. Where did you find out? The girl murmured. So, I was right. You knew all along. Larry's voice contained no hint of anger or irritation. Don't worry, I'm not mad. You were best friends, and even when you had your falling out, you kept silent. I understand. And how long have you known? Almost as soon as it happened for the first time. Of course, she didn't tell me anything, but Eleanor couldn't hide her behavior. She flirted shamelessly, not even caring that I was around. At first, I couldn't believe such blatant betrayal, but her frequent walks with you convinced me that I was right. Have you been watching us? No, I just know you very well. You can't attend parties that often. Besides, she wasn't hiding from anyone. And people, unlike deceived spouses, see and hear everything. When Eleanor left Henry, he immediately came to me and hinted at her infidelity. You should have seen the look on his face. By that time, I already knew about all of Eleanor's affairs. But, why did you? Why? Ruth stopped and turned to face him. Why did I ask you to talk to her about our marriage? Yes. I'm sorry. Although I knew you well, it wasn't enough. I thought you would either defend her and convince me that it was my fault for her reluctance to settle down, or you would expose her completely as a best friend, wanting to make an impression on me and to open my eyes. Wow, you have quite an opinion about best friends. Ruth exclaimed, feeling hurt. I'm sorry. Other people's advice and opinions misled me. But Ruth was so offended by his words that she turned away and walked ahead along the pathway. Ruth, wait. Larry caught up to her and took her hand, forcing her to stop. I'm sorry. I was a fool to think that way about you. It's just. Some time ago, I realized that I didn't need a wife like Eleanor. I observed you and regretted not seeing you clearly in time. Although that doubt arose in me on the evening when you defended your diplomas, the decision had already been made. I chose not to act on fleeting premonitions. Then we started seeing each other less, and I thought I had done the right thing until I found out about her affairs. Larry. Wait. Let me finish. When I came to you and asked you to talk to Eleanor about our marriage, I had another goal, to find out how you felt about me. And if you had exposed Eleanor back then, I would have immediately filed for divorce without a doubt and started courting you. And what did you find out? Ruth asked, annoyed, with a hint of a smile. That you are completely indifferent to me. And you decided to stay with Eleanor? No, we are in the process of getting a divorce. What do you mean? The news hit her like a ton of bricks. I can't live with a woman who betrayed me. Besides, I've fallen out of love with her. And what about Eleanor? Ruth was burning with curiosity. At first, she didn't believe me when I told her I filed for divorce. Then Eleanor accused you of betraying her. Then she said the divorce wouldn't happen. Now, it seems like she has calmed down. Why didn't you tell me anything? Honestly, I wanted to tell you everything. But after the divorce was finalized. However, I couldn't resist, I wanted to see you so badly. You give me confidence that I'm doing the right thing. Larry took a step toward Ruth. What does that mean? She recoiled. Just let me see you. I'll wait as long as you allow me to. And I'll accept any decision you make. Unable to believe what she was hearing, Ruth stood still, her eyes wide open, staring at Larry. On the day when Larry told her about the divorce and his feelings for her, she simply ran away. She couldn't believe that this was happening to her, that the man she secretly loved for so many years reciprocated her feelings. It felt like a dream to her. So, once she reached her home, she locked herself in and tried to wake up. Half an hour later, the doorbell rang. Ruth sat there, motionless. The bell rang again. On weak legs, she approached the door and looked through the peephole. It was Larry. Why did he come? Why was he tormenting her? But her hands automatically unlocked the door. As soon as the door opened, Ruth found herself immediately enveloped in his embrace. His passionate, demanding kisses deprived her of the strength to resist and contemplate anything at all. They regained their senses when the deep night was already outside the window. Burning with shame, Ruth rushed into the bathroom, where she stood under the shower for a long time, trying to collect herself and decide what to do next. "Ruth, are you okay?" an anxious voice called from behind the door. "Please, open up. I'm worried." Ruth wrapped herself in towels and opened the door, deliberately avoiding looking into the man's eyes. But he embraced her and led her into the room, where a small table was already set, with a bottle of champagne on it. To her surprised gaze, he explained, "Food delivery from restaurants is available 24/7. Then, Larry seated Ruth on the couch and poured them each a glass. "To you," he raised his glass. Ruth simply nodded and drank it all in one gulp. Warmth spread through her body, and the tension started to fade. "Ruth, forgive me." "Forgive you for what?" "If I had known that you hadn't been with any other men before me, I would have been more attentive." "Well, it's a good thing you didn't know." Ruth smirked and extended her glass to him. Their gazes met, his was joyfully excited and surprised, while hers was sad and pensive. "Ruth, I feel like something is wrong. Did I hurt you? Did I cause you pain?" "No, it was precisely the opposite. You didn't hurt me. I hurt myself." "But how?" "I let my feelings take over. I couldn't hold myself back and allowed all of this to happen. You're still a married man. I understand that you and Eleanor are going through a difficult time and you need some relief. I don't blame you. It's me, foolish me, who couldn't stop either you or myself." "What are you talking about?" "I'm divorcing Eleanor because she betrayed me and because I don't love her. I want to be with you. I'm the fool who realized too late that I need you. In a week, I'll be free, and we'll get married. Or do you regret it? Did I misunderstand everything? Are you with me out of pity?" "No, Larry. I've loved you for a long time, but..." "Then no circumstances matter," he enveloped her in his embrace. "We'll get married and be together." As the last week of the month, given to her for consideration, was drawing to a close, Ruth was preparing her speech for the director. She needed to convince him so that he would send someone else to Indonesia, ensuring it wouldn't affect her career. She was confident that she could reach an agreement with her boss, showing him how much more valuable she would be by his side. The sudden happiness and love that Larry brought into her life gave her strength. Of course, the thought of leaving together with her beloved crossed her mind, but she wasn't sure if he would agree. He had a beloved job and a good position here. What awaited him in Indonesia? It was unlikely that his engineering skills would be of use there. And she was certain that he wouldn't be able to stay without work for long. Eventually, he would blame her for leaving him without his beloved occupation. No, she'd rather get fired herself. She could always do freelance translations. In the worst-case scenario, she could try to find a job at the company where Larry worked. He mentioned that their translators were highly valued. Or maybe I should really quit the tourism company and get closer to my beloved. Then we'll hardly ever be apart. This thought inspired Ruth, and she was no longer afraid of the upcoming conversation with her boss. On the long-awaited day, while standing in the shower, Ruth was singing. Larry was preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Feeling an overwhelming sense of happiness, she suddenly wanted to be a little late for work. Without turning off the shower, in order to surprise Larry, she wrapped a towel around herself and quietly tiptoed out of the bathroom, heading towards the kitchen. Larry was angrily talking on the phone with someone. Ruth paused, not wanting to distract him. She would let him finish the conversation, and then she would help improve his mood. "And so what if you're pregnant?" Ruth froze. "We're getting a divorce. And I don't care about your situation." Ruth quietly turned around and ran to the bathroom. Closing the door behind her, she leaned against it and silently started to cry. Not only had she gotten involved with a married man, but now he was about to become a father too. And judging from what she had heard, not a very responsible one. He didn't care about his child or the child's mother. No, Ruth believed that Larry loved her. A man couldn't be like that if he didn't love her. "Ruth, I'll need to go somewhere after work. Can you get home on your own?" Yes, of course, Ruth tried to appear carefree. "What happened?" "Just a minor misunderstanding." Wow. It turns out that having a child is quite a predicament. Ruth suddenly felt uneasy. Trying to hide her disgust at those words, she got up from the table. "I'll get to work on my own, all right?" "Okay." She quickly kissed Larry and left for the hallway. Hurry. Hurry. He might figure out everything. "Mr. Albert. May I come in?" "Come in, Ruth," the boss smiled. "Did you come to inform me of your decision?" "Yes. I'm willing to fly out today." Ruth stretched out in the wicker chair. A warm, calming breeze blew from the ocean, as if whispering, "You did the right thing." It had been just over a year since her escape. During that time, she had almost calmed down, and memories of Larry no longer pained her heart as much. She was sure she had done the right thing. She had succumbed too quickly to her feelings, without giving Larry a chance to sort things out with his family. She had no regrets about what had happened. She was happy, albeit briefly. But those memories would warm her for the rest of her life. She had learned what it meant to love and be loved. But it was all too hasty. She knew she had done the right thing by leaving her love and giving Larry the opportunity to be a good father. The birth of the child was supposed to reunite her former friend Eleanor's family and her beloved man. Perhaps, by becoming a mother, Eleanor had changed and become the loving and caring wife that Larry had always dreamed of. Mr. Albert didn't deceive her. She was provided with accommodation of her choice on the island and a car for transportation, all free of charge. The first few months of intense work left no room for unhappy thoughts. Ruth barely slept, focusing on the opening of the branch. She personally met with representatives of their travel agency, accompanying them in their work and observing them. She toured all the hotels they had contracts with, had conversations with tourists, during which she discovered the dishonest performance of duties by some representatives of the travel agency and price inflation, contrary to the terms. The girl found a suitable location and rented it, carefully reviewed the personnel files and personally spoke with each of them. After a month, the branch's team was refreshed, trained, and began to perform their duties. Initially, flaws were found everywhere that had gone unnoticed before. Ruth documented them, made corrections, and continued to work. After 8 months, the branch finally yielded the expected profit. The system operated like a well-oiled machine, bringing satisfaction and pride to Ruth, and increasing profits to the management. At that moment, memories came back to her. And while she was so engrossed in her work during the day that she didn't think about anything else, at night her memory obligingly returned her to those days when she was happy. To avoid returning to the state of despair she was in when she arrived on the island, Ruth made a promise to herself that she would only think about Larry for 1 hour before going to sleep. And only about the good things they had between them. "Ms. Ruth, someone has come to see you," the housekeeper entered the living room. She was an Indian woman who was born into a poor family. In search of a better life, she and her husband moved to Indonesia. But things didn't work out for them here either. The girl went from office to office, offering her services as a cleaner and laundry worker. And her husband worked from morning till night on plantations for a pittance. The day she entered Ruth's newly opened office became the happiest for the woman. The young foreigner not only offered her a job in the office but also, after observing how diligently and joyfully the woman fulfilled all her requests, offered her a permanent position in her own home. Upon learning that the housekeeper's husband worked on plantations, Ruth invited him and offered him a job as a tourist bus driver. The new housekeeper's husband gladly accepted. They settled not far from their new employer's apartment and started each morning with a prayer for her health. Ruth was satisfied with her new employees. The only thing they couldn't do was call her by her full name. After much teaching and struggling, they settled on Ms. Ruth. Soon, all the subordinates began addressing Ruth in that way. After some thought, she agreed. It was better than nothing at all. Perhaps one of the assistants decided to work on their day off. Ruth thought and got up from her chair to greet her deputy. She immediately liked her deputy for his efficiency, diligence, education, and business acumen. He helped her understand the mentality of the indigenous people, translated words from a dialect she didn't understand, pointed out flaws she hadn't noticed, and was wholeheartedly devoted to her. And it was no wonder. A young man from a poor family who somehow managed to receive an education would never have obtained such a position among his wealthier compatriots. In every possible way, Ruth's deputy tried to convince her that she hadn't entrusted him with such a position in vain. She could wake him up at any time of the day or night, and he would happily go to carry out her orders on the other side of the island. If any worker didn't show up for work, he readily replaced them while simultaneously finding out the reason for their absence. He dealt with insolent employees in such a way that they became the most diligent. Under his vigilant supervision, the branch's accounting became so transparent that even Ruth, who was not particularly knowledgeable about it, understood all the calculations and sums. Ruth smiled broadly and looked at the person who had entered. "You?" The smile faded from her pale face. Seeing her employer's state, the housekeeper became agitated and asked, "Ms. Ruth, should I call the police?" "I'll call my husband right now." "No need," Ruth managed to say. "This is my friend. He just came uninvited. Bring us some coffee." The housekeeper, casting a wary glance at the guest, withdrew. Ruth silently stared at the person standing in front of her, unable to utter a word. It was as if those months had never happened. It was as if that hopeless pain hadn't gone anywhere. She was transported back to the day she overheard his phone conversation. Her heart was once again torn apart with despair. "Well, hello, Ruth." Larry broke the prolonged silence. "Hello, Larry. We'd better part ways." He read the note over and over again, unable to understand a word of it. Who should part ways? Why would it be better? His encounter with Eleanor shocked him. He rushed to Ruth, wanting to embrace her and find solace. He couldn't wait to forget that conversation like a terrible dream and rejoice in finally getting rid of the traitor. Eleanor was waiting for him at her club. It had been 2 months since they had seen each other properly. But she had changed greatly. If she had once been a flirtatious beauty, she had now turned into a vulgarly dressed woman, with provocatively bright makeup. "Hi, Larry," she said and tried to kiss him, but Larry stepped back. Unfazed, Eleanor clapped her hand on the seat next to her and asked, "Care for a drink?" "No, thank you." "What did you want?" "I wanted?" "No, darling, it was you who wanted." Larry silently looked at her, and Eleanor continued, "You wanted a real family, and now you'll have it." "Not with you." "And with whom?" "I'm still your wife." "We'll get divorced next week." "I don't think so. A judge won't deprive a pregnant woman of her husband." Eleanor smiled enchantingly and fluttered her heavily mascaraed eyelashes. "You're not pregnant with my child. And I can easily prove it by making you take a DNA test." "Oh, Larry. What difference does it make who I'm pregnant with? The important thing is that we'll have a complete, real family. After all, a father isn't the one who gives birth but the one who raises. I'm sure you'll be a wonderful father." Larry started to get furious. Eleanor, apparently, was firmly convinced that he would gladly accept her child and raise it. What audacity. "Eleanor. I'm divorcing you. I don't want your child. Let his father raise him. Go to him." His father is a married man, and he doesn't want children on the side. Enough, Eleanor. I'm not going to live with you and your child. If you don't agree to a divorce amicably, I will be forced to demand a DNA test, and then all your friends and relatives will find out who you really are. Although, I wouldn't be surprised if they already know. You don't exactly hide your affairs. There was no one at home. Larry turned on the light in the hallway and noticed a note on the dresser. We'd better part ways. Without undressing, he walked into the room, sat on the couch, and stared at the scrap of paper. Why? What happened? Did Ruth suddenly realize she didn't love him? Was it all temporary, and did she cool off so quickly? He repeatedly dialed her number, but the subscriber was unreachable. Larry jumped up and left the apartment. An hour later, he was knocking on the door of Ruth's parents. I was surprised myself at how rushed it all was. Ruth's mother fussed around Larry, pouring him tea, slicing pie. She called from work and said she was leaving in a couple of hours and would explain everything later. Didn't you know she was offered a job in Indonesia? No. She didn't tell me anything. Do you know specifically where she's headed? Well, how would I know? Even her superiors don't know. She said she was given the choice of any location, and she would decide where to stay once she arrived. Don't worry, as soon as I find out, I'll let you know right away. The next day, Larry was at the office where Ruth worked. Unfortunately, young man, we haven't received any updates from her yet, Mr. Albert shrugged. Come back in a month. By then, we should definitely know her whereabouts. A month? Larry paced around his office, unsure of what to do. He called Ruth's mother, who still didn't know anything. Calm down, Larry. Your restlessness won't do any good. Be patient. As soon as I find out something, I'll call you immediately. By evening, Larry finally calmed down. First, he would deal with Eleanor, and then he would focus on finding Ruth. To Larry's astonishment and outrage, Eleanor stated in court that she was expecting a child and didn't want to deprive the child of a father. However, when Larry demanded a DNA test, she claimed it would be dangerous for the baby and refused to allow it. The court sided with Eleanor and postponed the divorce proceedings until after the child's birth. Later that evening, Eleanor came to Larry's house and announced that she had quit her job and would be preparing for the impending birth, expecting him to provide for her. Barely restraining himself from throwing her out, Larry said, "Fine. Stay. I will provide you with groceries and necessary medications if prescribed by a doctor. But you won't get a single cent from me. If you lie, you'll be out of this house in no time." Eleanor stretched her lips into a smile. She certainly knew how to make a man fall in love and start spending money on her, but the smile began to fade from her face when she saw Larry packing his things. "Where are you going?" "I'll stay with friends." "Did you really think I would want to live in the same apartment with you?" "You're just afraid that you won't be able to resist me." Eleanor squealed. Larry simply shook his head and walked out the door. Eleanor was convinced that she could manage perfectly fine without Larry. After all, she was a beautiful woman who could instantly attract men's attention. "Hello. How about meeting up today?" "Sorry, I'm busy." "Sweetie. Your little darling misses you. They say you're pregnant." "Sorry, but I have no desire to meet with women who are expecting a child." "And what's wrong with that?" Short beeps. "We want to see our daddy." "Eleanor, I already told you that I don't want this child. I have a wife. And besides, don't call me again." "Baby. Who are you? Are you crazy?" "I'm Eleanor. We met last weekend at the club." "Oh. You're the one who's pregnant and planning to foist someone else's child on some fool?" "Sorry, baby. Nothing personal, but I prefer girls younger than you. You were just a drunken mistake. Goodbye." Eleanor hung up the phone. What does all this mean? Is she sleeping? All her lovers just rejected her. How could this even happen? She picked up the phone again to make a call. Oh, Eleanor, hi. We're having a party here. Come over. Thank goodness. At least someone is still waiting for her. Eleanor hurriedly started getting ready. After leaving the house, Larry first went to a hotel. He didn't want to inconvenience his friends with his presence. Right at the hotel entrance, he unexpectedly ran into Ruth's mother. "What are you doing here, Larry?" the woman exclaimed. "What are you doing here?" Larry rudely responded with a question. "I was visiting a friend and decided to take a walk." Ruth's mother ignored the man's tone. "I'm moving." "To a hotel?" The woman looked at the young man in surprise. Dim eyes, tired appearance. "Come on, let's go, have a cup of coffee." She took his arm and led him to the nearest cafe. Larry didn't resist. After ordering a cup of coffee, Ruth's mother commanded, "Tell me everything." Whether due to the tension of the past few days or despair over being separated from Ruth, Larry told her everything. About his broken family life, Eleanor's infidelity, his love for Ruth, and his prolonged contemplation that led to Ruth's escape and her pregnancy from another man who refused to give him a divorce. Ruth's mother listened to him almost without interrupting, only occasionally asking clarifying questions during his scattered narrative. "Larry. Forget about the hotel. Go to Ruth, her apartment is empty anyway." Larry initially refused, but then decided it would be better that way. From that day on, he frequently visited Ruth's parents in the hope that she would soon reveal her whereabouts. "She called the other day, but I couldn't find out where she is. And she forbade me from mentioning you." Larry sighed heavily. If it weren't for this situation with Eleanor's pregnancy, he would have immediately set out to find Ruth, traveled all over Indonesia if necessary, but he would find her. Although it wouldn't be necessary. Once he knew the location of the branch, finding the address of the manager wouldn't be difficult. "I think she somehow found out about Eleanor's pregnancy and decided to give your family a chance," Ruth's mother speculated. "What chance? Eleanor isn't pregnant with my child. We haven't slept together for several months before I started dating Ruth. I would believe Ruth being pregnant sooner." Larry replied. "Don't get worked up. Everything will be resolved. I assure you, Ruth loves you and will understand. But first, you need to sort out your problems. Don't start new relationships without ending the old ones. Once you've dealt with Eleanor, go for a fresh start with Ruth. I'm afraid Eleanor will do anything to keep me as her husband." "Well, think about how to prevent that from happening." "And who do we have here, all plump?" Eleanor struggled to open her eyes and looked at the person speaking. Above her stood a large, bloated man of indeterminate age, with a huge red nose on his chubby face. The stench of alcohol emanating from him immediately made her feel nauseous. Pushing the man away, Eleanor rushed to find the bathroom. After finally locating it, she stood by the sink for a long time. When the bout passed, she looked at herself in the mirror. Disheveled hair, smeared mascara, and her clothes missing. Did she do something with this man? Eleanor leaned over the sink again. Wrapped in a towel, she stepped out of the bathroom and looked around, a decent apartment, albeit untidy. The man was in shorts. A huge hairy belly protruded no less than Eleanor's own. "Here, have a drink to cure your hangover," the man handed her a glass with some liquid. "You'll feel better." Eleanor frowned and looked around for water. How did she end up here? As if answering her silent question, the man jovially said, "We met at the club. Me and my friend. We even joked that expectant mothers also want to relax. Then we went to my place, here. We had a few more drinks, and your friend left with my friend, while you stayed with me. I love pregnant women. Can you take me home?" Eleanor's voice was splitting her head. "Oh, come on, what would you do there? You said yourself that your husband doesn't care about you," the chubby man smiled kindly. "Stay here. I'll take care of you. I can see how unwell you are." I love pregnant women. Baby, I understand everything, but someone else's child, especially with your lifestyle during pregnancy, is absolutely not what I need. Juan hurriedly dressed. Eleanor sat in the chair in his apartment, legs crossed. It had been a month since they met. At first, she wanted to forget about this vulgar, unkempt man like a bad dream, but he turned out to be surprisingly caring and sweet. He courted her, brought flowers and gifts, fulfilled all her whims, and took her to restaurants and clubs. With no better options, Eleanor resigned herself. I'll give birth and then get rid of this fat man, she thought. She knew that as soon as the child was born, Larry would demand a DNA test, and the court would favor him. Eleanor knew that the court wouldn't force Larry to raise someone else's child, which meant she would face divorce and poverty. And on top of it all, a crying baby. She had no hope in her parents either. Once her father found out about her promiscuous lifestyle and her pregnancy with another man, he forbade her from coming to their house. And her mother couldn't help her as she was entirely dependent on her husband. The idea of marrying Juan came naturally to her. But to her surprise, the usually compliant man who always tried to please her refused. Sort out the issues with your child, with your husband first, and then we'll get married. But right away, you have to give birth to another baby for me. Juan smiled widely and waved his hand. All right, darling. Goodbye. See you tonight. Oh, really? Just wait. Eleanor jumped off the chair and hurried to gather her things. You'll come running after me. Imagine that. Suddenly you wanted your own child. You won't get it. And you'll have to raise this one all by yourself. Collecting her belongings, Eleanor heartlessly left Juan's apartment. Let him worry a little. When she arrived home, she immediately called her friend, the one they met Juan with. Hey, girlfriend, how about a party? Eleanor, it's probably difficult for you to move around already. What party? What? I can dance longer at a party than you can. Well, I'm not against it. But be careful, you never know what might happen. No worries. Anyway, see you at our spot. You're cute. The young, charming boy looked at Eleanor. Me? Cute? Eleanor laughed drunkenly. I'm gorgeous. Yeah, especially with your pregnant belly, the guy laughed too. Do you want to continue the party in a more secluded place? It's stuffy and crowded here. Eleanor. Let's get out of here. Her friend pulled Eleanor's hand. Let's go. The young man is inviting us to a private party. Let's just go home. Her friend's voice was anxious, but Eleanor ignored her. So, shall we go to your party? She looked at the guy seductively. He smiled widely. Eleanor. Her friend tried to stop her one last time. Don't go. But Eleanor just waved her hand. Eleanor woke up on a bench in the park. Her head was throbbing painfully, and everything was spinning. Her body ached, and it felt damp. She looked around. Where was she? How did she end up here? The face of the smiling boy came to her mind. Then there were more faces. She remembered someone laughing loudly and pouring a disgusting liquid into her. It was painful, repulsive, and terrifying. Then everything disappeared. She examined herself and almost screamed in horror. There was a large brown stain on her torn clothes below. Eleanor searched for her purse with her hands. Luckily, both it and her phone were still there. Juan. Help me. The next time Eleanor woke up, she was in a hospital room. Her head was hurting again, there was a metallic taste in her mouth, and she couldn't feel anything in her lower abdomen. Finally. A familiar voice sounded somewhere nearby. Struggling to turn her head, she saw Juan. Where am I? She whispered with her dry lips. In the hospital. I searched the whole park before finding you. You were in a terrible condition. Beaten up, with severe bleeding. So, did you have a good time? Eleanor turned away and started crying. She spent 2 months in the hospital. After the incident, the baby did not survive. The chance of getting pregnant again was slim. Juan faithfully visited her in the hospital, trying to cheer her up. After her discharge, he took her to his place. A couple of months later, they had a court hearing where Eleanor silently signed the divorce papers. Now she sat at home, and even Juan went grocery shopping for her. Every evening, she anxiously awaited his return from work, fearing that instead of coming home, he would go to a club and find a younger and more promising girl in terms of having children. On this evening, Juan was late. Eleanor repeatedly dialed his phone number, but the subscriber was unavailable. She started trembling, tears streaming down her face, and thoughts of suicide raced through her mind. Amidst her tears, she didn't hear the sound of the key turning in the lock. Surprised and frightened, Juan rushed to her. "Eleanor, what happened? You were completely unreachable. The phone was unavailable." "I thought something happened," she managed to say through her sobs. "What could happen to me? My phone died. But Juan began frantically searching his pockets. Finally, he found what he was looking for. "I went to get this," he said, holding a ring in his large palm. Eleanor stared at the ring. "What? Are you proposing to me?" "Well, yes," Juan smiled shyly. "Why should we just live like that? You're a free woman now. But I probably can't bear children for you. You will be able to." The long and painful waiting was over. He was free. Now he just had to quit his job, buy the tickets, and... But what if she rejects you? What if she's already married? Larry's friend tried to dissuade him from hasty decisions. "Take some time off, go, find out everything, gather information. What if she's already married to some local guy and raising a couple of mixed-race kids? According to her mother, Ruth hasn't done anything like that. But what if she carefully hid it from her mother? Why? What's the point of hiding her grandchildren from their grandmother, even if they are from a foreign man? Her mother is a wonderful woman, she has no prejudices based on skin color. Still, I wouldn't rush with quitting your job. It's all right. If Ruth doesn't want to see me or if she's already married, I'll come back and find another job. After all, I'm a decent professional." "As you wish." Larry stood in front of a small 2-story building, with a European-style cafe on the ground floor and Ruth's travel agency branch on the second floor. Despite it being a day off, there were few customers in the cafe. He entered, ordered a cup of coffee, and approached the bartender, hoping that he spoke English. "Excuse me, why are there so few customers?" "Well, it's not the season right now." Fortunately, the bartender knew English. "The rainy season is about to start, and tourists don't like that." Larry nodded and took a sip of his coffee. He didn't yet know how to steer the conversation towards the director of the travel agency located above the cafe. But unexpectedly, the bartender helped him. "Are you Spanish by any chance?" the bartender asked. "Yes, how did you know?" Larry was surprised. "Oh. I'm good at recognizing foreigners, especially when they start speaking," the bartender grinned. "And thanks to my new neighbor," the bartender gestured towards the ceiling, "I can now instantly recognize Spaniards." "Interesting." Larry nodded. "Then I'm very lucky that your neighbor is Spanish. I'm not very good with languages, but I would like to see the country specifically in the places that interest me, rather than the ones shown to tourists." "You're in the right place. Mrs. Ruth caters to her clients. She has a personalized approach for everyone." "Great. Then I won't delay." Larry, pleased with his cunning, got off the high stool. "I'm afraid it won't work out for you today," the bartender stopped him. "Why?" "Mrs. Ruth is off today. Her deputy is there, but he doesn't handle such individual matters." "That's fine. I'll try to negotiate." Larry was greeted by a friendly young man. "How can I help you?" "I need Ruth," Larry said in a friendly yet demanding tone. Mrs. Ruth is off today, but I assure you, you can fully trust me, the young man replied without any hesitation. I'm a friend of Ruth, and I would like to speak to her in person. Larry's smile turned into suspicion. Then he took out his phone and showed the young man several photos of Ruth, where she was with her parents, with him and Eleanor. All right, I'll explain how to get to her house, the young man reluctantly agreed. 10 minutes later, Larry was speeding along the highway in a rented car heading towards the ocean. She looked even more beautiful. The sun-kissed skin and the local attire suited her well. Larry admired her while she regained her composure after his arrival. Hello, Ruth. He wanted to run up to her, scoop her up in his arms, and kiss her until she melted in his embrace and responded to him. Hello, Larry. Ruth had conflicting emotions. She wanted to throw herself at him and push him away at the same time, but instead, she asked, How did you find me? It was easier than waiting for the day I could see you. Larry replied. You waited a long time. I'm sorry. I'll tell you everything and explain. If you allow me. They talked until evening. Ruth would start crying, then laugh, then cry and laugh again. Larry embraced her, comforted her, kissed her, and laughed with her. The concerned housekeeper occasionally peeked into the living room, not knowing what to do. Finally, unable to resist, she ran to her husband and anxiously asked him to keep an eye on the guest. With just one look, her husband understood everything. He gently hugged his wife by the shoulders and led her away from the living room. My dear. It's as clear as day here. This is our mistress's lover, from whom she fled here, and he found her. I don't think you need to rush to work tomorrow morning. And leave early today. Don't disturb the lovebirds. The housekeeper didn't believe it, but when she returned to the living room to ask when to serve dinner, her mistress Ruth was passionately kissing the man who had arrived. 5 years later. Tell me, Larry, does your wife stick to the children as much as mine does? I can only play with my own son under her supervision. But first, I have to take a shower, shave, and sanitize my hands with odorless antiseptic. Juan grumbled as he took a sip of beer. I even drink less now because, you see, it's harmful for the child to smell alcohol. And what about the stench from a glass of beer? Let alone anything stronger. I can't remember the last time I had a drink. Ruth can be understood. Our son was too difficult for her to handle. That's why she worries so much about him. Larry glanced around, searching for Ruth. His wife was peacefully dozing off in a lounge chair, leaving the care of the twins to their grandparents. Ruth and the housekeeper were engrossed in discussing sunblock for children, their gaze fixed on their little ones. Mrs. Ruth. The assistant, as always wearing a wide smile, emerged onto the mini beach owned by Ruth and Larry. Let's go to the table, the meat is ready. Everyone sprang into action. Ruth, after glancing at Juan, scooped up her son and headed towards the chalet. The housekeeper, holding their daughter's hand, and embracing his wife, followed suit. The twins quickly walked, holding onto the long hem of their grandmother's skirt. Ruth and Larry brought up the rear. Larry, hugging his wife, tried to walk as slowly as possible. Larry, do you want everyone to wait for us? Ruth stopped. Just a little longer. He pulled her close and kissed her with a lingering kiss. Then, breaking apart, he said, How wonderful that life has fallen into place. How wonderful that we are together. I love you. I love you too.
An amazing story, isn't it? Thank you for listening till the end. I sincerely hope that you truly enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and rate this video. See you in the comments and in new